and welcome to Simply Quilts. Joining me today is my friend Margaret Miller. Margaret, it's just so great to have you here. I think I saw you, what, a couple, I don't know.
Many miles ago, but just a couple weeks ago in Sisters.
Right, in Sisters. That was a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
Now, what we're doing today is strips that sizzle. It all starts with
strips of fabric, but the magic is that we get a lot of variety from block to block. It makes quilters who have never put more than 2 or 3 fabrics in a quilt to use a range of values and many fabrics in a quilt rather than just 1 or 2 or 3.
And this is the basic block? This is it?
This is the basic block. As you see, there are 2 versions. One, when you cut a block, you actually make 2 quilt blocks. One has dark values along one edge and one has light values along one edge. Takes all the agony out of choosing values for quilts.
Now, do you find that a lot of your students come and they get all, oh, I can't make a decision?
Well, mostly they think they have to make the right decision ahead of time, and that's their first hurdle. But if they would just relax and just choose 6 to 8 values, 8 to 10 values, light to dark, in 2 color families, that's all they need for strips that sizzle.
And you can get these wonderful quilts just from that?
Just from that, just from 2 color families.
Now, let me ask you something. When you do choose the color families you're going to work with, what do you keep in mind?
Well, for one thing, it depends on the kind of quilt you want. If you want a quiet, subdued quilt, you'll choose 2 colors that are very close together on the color wheel. If you want a more...
Okay, well, let's look at this.
All
You
right.
mean like within this range here?
Yes. If you chose blues and greens, you'd have a very quiet quilt and a very subdued quilt and a very restful quilt. If you chose oranges and blues, you'd have a much more vibrant quilt. Anything that's opposite each other on the color wheel.
Let me back up then. Just to this part. So you could just keep working around the color wheel like this. It doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
Even this?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And you could actually choose 3 color families. The more color wheels are a lot of fun to play with as a quilt maker because again, it becomes like a puzzle and you just don't have the box top. So if you can make a quilt with 2 fabrics, you go back to the color wheel and then you rotate it and make a quilt with 3 fabrics.
So you've got this, and then you've got a cross, no matter what.
Any groupings by playing with the color wheel are going to work with strips that sizzle.
What do I need to start?
You need to start, first of all, you need skill, Alex. You need to be able to cut with a rotary cutter, and you need to be able to sew a 1/4 inch seam. But if you can handle that, you can handle strips that sizzle.
I can do that.
All
I
right.
can do that. I am a rotary cutter queen.
All right. The first step is to cut the strips themselves. And the other aspect of strips that sizzle, it's very quickly done. You can cut many fabrics at one time, and as you see here, we've got the fabrics laid out. You can cut 4 to 6 fabrics at one time.
Are you talking about layers or different fabrics?
Different fabrics. You can cut, we have 4 different fabrics here. Strips that sizzle is a very forgiving technique. You don't agonize about grain line, you don't agonize about anything. You jump in and do it. Jump in and do it.
Okay.
The first step is to lay out the fabrics so that they are offset from each other by a small amount so that it'll be easier to separate the strips by fabric later. The first step is to slit the fabric at the fold because we're going to use a short length of a strip. We're not going to be sewing a selvage to selvage length because the magic in strips that sizzle is getting as much variety from block to block as possible. So we're going to jump right in and sew 5 different widths.
You're going to cut?
I'm going to cut 5 different widths of strips.
Okay.
And these we're going to mix up almost at random in the blocks.
Now what are the numbers for the cut?
All right, the first cut is 2.5 inches. We're going to cut 2.5, then a 2 1/4,
2 1/4,
a 2, a 1 3/4, and 1 1/2. So it's 5 different widths. What we're trying to do is mix up the widths as well as mix up the values when we go to choose the strips for...
Okay, so it's 2 1/2, 2 1/4, 2, 1 3/4, 1 1/2,
right.
all 1/4 inch increments.
All 1/4 inch increments. And this again will give the variety to the strips that sizzle block. You don't agonize about anything. You just jump in and cut the widths, arrange them on the table, and just go for it. So we have only 2 more strips to cut here, and remember we're cutting 4 different fabrics at a time, so this is a lot of cutting in a very short period of time. Now, the reason we offset these is that now we can separate these fabrics by width very, very quickly.
Now, last we cut up our strips, we sorted them from light to dark. Now what?
All right, we sorted them by fabric, light to dark. So all the different measurements were in the same pile. They sorted them by fabric, lighter towards darker. What I have here are a few sample strips sewn together. Obviously, the two color families are reds and greens.
Yeah, I get that.
I thought you could handle that, Alex. Notice that they are sewed together lighter towards darker as well.
Okay,
They're sewed together with 1/4-inch seams, just very, very fast sewing.
Is it important to get a perfect 1/4 inch on this particular block?
Really, not at all. In fact, I usually sew with a scant 1/4-inch seam. You don't even need a full 1/4 inch. But notice that they're not necessarily wider to narrower. You want to mix up the widths, but the important thing is to have it lighter on one edge toward darker on the other.
I can see that this light is much wider than this light.
That's right, and it's much lighter than that light as well, but that's what you want. You want as much variety as possible from one grouping of strips to the other. So to make the block, you need one grouping of strips from each color family. So we'll get rid of these two. And in order to make the magic with the strips that sizzle block, you need to follow a few guidelines. And that is that, first of all, you are sewing together only enough strips so that you can cut a 6-inch square out of those strips already sewn together.
Okay, say that again.
All right, you want to sew together only enough strips so that you can cut this 6-inch block or this 6-inch square out of the grouping. So you really need to sew together only about 7 inches finished.
If you got the 6 inches with 4 blocks or 4 strips, is that okay?
Sure,
okay.
Sure. Sometimes it will take at least 4 strips to get across this 6-inch span, sometimes 5. All right, there are a few guidelines in order to get the 3D effects that you can get with this technique. Cutting guidelines, and those are these. First of all, you're going to take one grouping of strips from one color family and one from the other. Make sure that you put them right sides together, just like you do sew a blouse or a skirt or anything like that. Right side to right side.
And lights and darks.
Right. The second thing is that the darks are in your lap. The darks are towards you. You wouldn't want to put together strips where you had darks in your lap for one color family and lights in your lap for the other, or your blocks would not do what you want them to do.
They wouldn't sizzle?
They might do something worse than sizzle. Anyway, darks in your lap, right sides together, and we're going to place the template. The third thing is you want to make sure to always have the same color family against the table. You wouldn't want to cut some of the blocks with greens against the table and some of the blocks with reds against the table, because what you'd end up with is 2 sets of mirror image blocks.
Okay, so there's 3 major things.
3 major things.
Like sides together.
Right sides together.
Okay. Make sure it's over 6 inches.
Darks in your lap
and lights on top.
Right. And you also want to make sure that you always have the same color against the table.
Got it.
All right. Again, strips that sizzle is a very forgiving technique. You just more or less line up the fabrics on straight of grain or raw edges together. You place the template on the strips so that it's more or less parallel to the raw edges. And I normally cut 2 sides first, like so. And of course, you never ever want to be using your rotary cutter behind your elbow. So what I normally do is turn the whole thing around and cut the other 2 sides.
I like this. I like this a whole lot.
Really, especially the rotary cutter behind the elbow part, right?
That's right.
All right. Now, the last cut you're going to make is a diagonal cut, a corner-to-corner cut. The third criterion then, or the fourth, is that you always make that diagonal in the same direction.
Okay.
If you do some of the diagonals this direction and some of the diagonals this way, you're going to get those 2 mirror image blocks. So we're going to cut a corner-to-corner diagonal, and this is where the fun begins. When you then sew a 1/4-inch seam down these bias edges, when you will be cutting, when you cut your diagonal, you have cut ready to sew pairs. You're sewing a 1/4-inch seam down this diagonal seam. A trick to keeping the biases under control is to sew with the seam allowances. In other words, sew with the seam allowance in that direction. If I sewed from the green side, notice I'd be sewing against the seam allowances, and that's going to just make your bias really move around. But this is where the fun begins. When you sew that 1/4-inch seam down the bias edge, you get 2 blocks.
Oh, that's wonderful.
One with the light values along one edge, and a companion block with the dark values along one edge.
Margaret, I just think these quilts are phenomenal, and I'm amazed at how you break them down. Now let's just keep on going with this and tell me what's next.
Okay, I was afraid you were jumping too fast to the quilt because we're really not finished this process yet. Remember that we want to build as much variety as we can from block to block. And so what we're going to do is cut all the blocks first and then sew them together. And this will ensure that you get a lot of variety. If we go back to the strips from which we cut this first couple of blocks, notice that there is room to really cut another set here. But in order to build as much variety from block to block, we're going to take this red strip off and put another one of our red groupings on so that, again, we're cutting a different block from this set.
Dark to bottom.
Dark in your lap, right sides together, darks in your lap. Same color is already against the table, so you don't have to worry about that quite so much. We'll go through the same procedure, line up the strips so that they're more or less raw edges together, line up the template so it's more or less parallel to the edges, cut out the block, cut the diagonal seam the same direction, right? You're getting good at this.
That's right.
Now, to help you keep straight which direction you did the diagonal, once these are cut out, pick them up and put them in the pile. Take this red strip off and put another one on to cut the last block, and that will ensure that you're getting as much variety from block to block as possible.
That's great. Now you go and you sew it with a 1/4-inch seam allowance. Any tips on pressing?
All right, pressing is very important. What we do is press. I usually like to press blocks closed first, and then I just gently nudge them open with an iron.
So this is called setting the seam.
Right,
okay.
Right. And just gently nudge them open with the iron. So the seam allowance will be pressed to one side.
Do you just make a decision it's either green or it's either red?
It doesn't really matter.
Okay.
It doesn't matter. You can do half of them one way and half the other. It really
It's getting
doesn't
better.
matter. Oh, it doesn't matter. No agonizing, just go for it.
All right, now we have a bunch of blocks. Show me what to do with it.
All right, this is where the real fun begins because what we have is a lot of blocks to play with on the design wall. And this is just one of several hundred ways these blocks can be put together.
Are you serious when you say several hundred?
I am absolutely serious. It's probably more like several thousand. Wow. These blocks happen to be on point. Obviously, there are lots of ways you could put them together so that the blocks are square. So that doubles the several thousand ways.
So here it's set on point.
The blocks are set on point.
Or you could do a straight set, which means
right.
the blocks go in rows across
as
evenly.
Squares.
Right.
But the dramatic thing is how these blocks change as you rotate them even in place. Here we have our dark blocks, and I just look at the long strips, and if they're dark values, I call that a dark block. If the long strips are light value, refer to those as light blocks. Here we have a very simple arrangement, a row of dark diamonds and a row of light diamonds, if you refer to the blocks as diamonds, as blocks on point. Now look what happens when I take only the dark blocks and I turn them upside down. I'm taking only every other row and turning it upside down. Now what we have is stripes, red and green stripes.
Now something's happening here, and I'm wondering if it's something you would change. Does it bother you when two fabrics butt up next to each other like that? Would you change that?
No, well, I might.
Okay.
I might at the very end, but for the most part, there's more variety. This is a very small grouping of blocks, and normally you have 4 or 5 times this number, so that really very seldom happens because they get all mixed up. Now, in this pattern, we have vertical stripes. Whenever you have something in a very regular pattern, the first thing you should think of is how can I make that pattern do something unexpected? Notice that by rotating these blocks in place, I'm not taking them all down and starting all over or anything. Now we can begin to get a maze pattern going through the quilt. So it's as simple as turning every other block upside down to get an entirely different quilt
The possibilities really are endless, aren't they?
The challenge in these quilts, Alex, is to stop playing with the blocks and sew them together in quilts.
And you really believe that beginners can achieve any of these just by starting with those great blocks you gave us?
Oh, absolutely. I think this is a place for beginners to begin because it takes all the agony out of choosing fabrics.
Margaret, this has been absolutely so much fun for me. I'm so glad to have you on my show, and I want to do this, and I know everybody at home does too. Instant results, lots of color. It's been the best. Thanks for coming.
I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Thanks for joining us. Happy quilting. See you next time on Simply Quilts.